ask if, I know you guys don't want Samia to use this, but do you want me to use it?
Yes.
Yeah? All right.
Well, guys, welcome. I'm not going to, because I have a voice louder than probably Samuel's. So, if at any point you can't hear me, just go like this. And I'm going to assume you're not criticizing me as a human, you're just criticizing how loud I am. So, this is me and Vinny's talk, a hitchhiker's guide to remote work. And I think, oh no. Oh, sorry, we have to use the click wheel. That's how it works. Yes. So you'll probably see a lot of this. Okay, so a little bit about me. I actually got a Bachelor of Arts in Computer Science from UBC because I was a psychology grad transfer. Got half a master's in science, and I've been working with a couple of startups over the past 2 years. One of my fun facts is before I went back to university, I actually did car sales.
So as for me, as Samia introduced me, my name is Vinicius. I have quite a diverse background. I actually have an undergrad in mechanical engineering, but I actually never worked as a mechanical engineer. And I did a master in what they call general engineering, that was in France. Then I went back to Brazil and did a master's in automation and systems. And I've been working probably, if I add up all the years, I've been working for 7 years in the software industry. And among those, for 4 years, I've been working remotely. And fun fact about me is that I did some stints in the financial industry. I worked as a stock analyst, which is really kind of paying attention to the stocks. They're in the stock market, building financial models for them, kind of calculating their valuation, saying how much a stock price would be worth, and those kind of fun things.
So I'm just going to give you a quick outline. We'll try and make you guys stand up at least once during this talk so you don't fall asleep on us. We're going to first just do a real quick definition of what the heck is remote work, why we care about it, kind of what you need to pay attention to if you want to do remote work, like how do you need to think about it? Kind of the downsides, the upsides, and then how can you actually mitigate some of those downsides, some habits to succeed, and some of the more detail-oriented stuff at the very end, since we're a room full of engineers. So, Vinny.
What is remote work? So, you guys probably heard about remote work, and we just wanted to make sure we're on the same page, so we're talking about the same thing when we say remote work. So, what do we mean by remote work? Let's see what Google has to tell us. So, remote comes from Latin, removere, remotus, which means removed, or English remove, which means remote, far apart. And then work, I think everyone already knows what that means nowadays.
Well, students might not, but.
Interestingly enough, it's work apparently means the same thing in all those different languages. So in Old English, I don't know how to pronounce that, but in Germanic, Dutch, German, all of the different languages, they all have work and it all means the same thing. So what we're talking about here is like remote work. So you're distant from the place in which you're doing your actual work. So your distance in terms of like physicality, your distance in terms of like your coworkers are not around you. So that's what we mean by remote work.
So, why do I like remote work? Me and Vinny have different reasons because we have different types of jobs and different type of remote situations. I like it because if I'm up late playing board games or going out for sushi or to a bar, I don't have to wake up at 9 a.m., right? I can sleep in knowing that what's the point in waking up early when I know I'm not going to get good work done? So let's have a sleep, and also dogs are great. Next, one of the cool things is once you roll out of bed, what if you have a meeting? What if that's your kind of moment of synchrony? Well, you put on a nice dress shirt, but that's about it.
Before we go into that, so
Oh, sorry about that.
to me, why do I like remote work? So I like it because I can decouple the place where I work from the place where I live. So you see, I really like outdoor, I really like snowboarding, river surfing, and as you know, Calgary is very close to the mountains, is a very good place for that. But at the same time, I'm very passionate about software engineering. And with remote work, I can actually work for companies that are in New York, that are in San Francisco. I'm actually currently working for a company that's based in New York. And what's interesting about this is that you can be exposed to, for example, US startup culture. You can be working for companies that are working on the cutting edge of technology. They're developing things that are at the border of the technology. So it's interesting that if you do remote work, you can decouple those things and really optimize for both of them at the same time. So, John and I were curious, who here has worked remotely? Can I see some hands? Oh, nice. Quite a few people, more or less. Who has not worked remotely? Okay, say about 50-50. And it's actually interesting because we wanted to argue with you guys that in a way you guys have worked remotely in a way, you know, when you have assignments that you need to do that you're like uploading them to the University of Calgary's professor, sending email. You have group projects that you're having to email your colleagues, and usually we're doing that, say, from the library, from home. So in a way, you are distant from them. So in a way, you guys have been doing remote work, you know, in some kind of form. And maybe you haven't been paid for that, or you have. I don't know what kind of thing have been going on at the university nowadays. So, can you really work remotely? And this is something when I started my software engineering career. I always heard about remote work, and I always thought it was a great idea. But it always seems something very rare and very difficult to find. So to me, it was kind of always this mysticism around it. So, can you really work remotely? Yes, you can. As you can see, all journalists here are agreeing with me. And as a fun fact, actually the first job that I landed as a software engineer, one of my colleagues, as I was chatting with him, he was telling me about his previous experience, and a couple of them had been remote work. So this was very eye-opening to me because my first job, one of the first colleagues that I met, he had remote work experience. And so this was very eye-opening to me because it meant that it was out there, it was close, it was attainable.
So, what are the actual numbers? What are not just me and Vinny's opinions? Because we're engineers, we need at least a few numbers. I cut down a lot. There's a lot of stats out there on remote work. I was hoping these are probably the most useful ones for you guys in one slide. People who work remote, like me and Vinny, love it. And Brooklyn. Brooklyn here has told me that even if he moves to Calgary, he does not want to do non-remote work, even if we're in the same city. For most of the time, at least. And I understand that. Once remote, always remote is kind of a statistic. When the statistic itself is 90% of people who work remote now want to forever work remote. So that's a big deal. Another thing is people who partially or fully work remote, 94% of them will recommend remote work to others. So that's a huge thing. It at least means there's a lot of satisfaction in remote work. Maybe not from a company's perspective, although there are a lot of stats on that. I just think you guys don't care as much about that. Now this is neat. 81% of people who work remote will do it while traveling. So, for instance, I'm going to go to the Okanagan next week, assuming I don't get killed by forest fires. And I'm going to keep working at the same time. So I get to, maybe jump in the lake during my quick, take a 15-minute break, go swim, come back, keep working. How many people can say that when they're actually in their, non-remote state? Now these are kind of interesting stats though that you should be aware of about that can negatively affect your companies. Well, this is positive. 53% of managers say that at their company, they're doing even more remote work than 3 years ago. So that doesn't mean like 50% of companies do remote work. It means that there's an increase even amongst all companies, or at least 50-some% more than before that are doing remote work. And this is bad. 57% of managers say remote policy doesn't really exist at their companies, of the ones who actually do remote work. So this is saying, we even do remote work, and we don't really know how to manage it yet from a policy perspective, which can be bad for you guys if you're in one of those companies.
So we've been telling you guys about like remote work a bit into it and explained that there were kind of some variations of it that, as we were analyzing, we thought it was very interesting. So as good engineers, we like to represent things in charts and graphs. And so here, what we're seeing is kind of in terms of the physical location of your work. So at the very extreme of the axis, you have office every day, and that's probably what you guys have seen around a lot, which is like everyone's goes to the same physical building every day, like everyone's the same location. And so as you start adding some remoteness to it, then some companies will have this fixed office schedule, fixed office remote schedule, which basically is, they'll say a couple of days a week, we'll just have people working remotely. Say Tuesdays and Fridays, no one comes into the office, everyone will be working remotely. And then going another step up in terms of remote, there's a flexible office remote schedule, which a lot of companies have that too. So basically people can decide their own schedules when they want to go to the office, when they want to work from somewhere else. So that's, it's up to them to decide. And what's interesting is that in a lot of companies that do this kind of arrangement, people will usually sync up because when they go to the office, they want to be there to connect with their coworkers. They want to be there because they want to work together. So, and then at the other extreme of our remoteness axis, we have remote every day, which means you never go to the office, or pretty much never.
Yeah.
And this one is interesting because there will be companies here that they won't even have an office. Like the company will exist basically on the cloud or at your workspace.
Yeah. Now, there's another axis too, though, that you need to think about, and it's time, right? Me and Vinny work on, these two different axes in different spots. So it's synchronous versus asynchronous. So synchronous is you go into your office, you're at your cubicle from 9 to 5. Someone comes up, bangs on your cubicle like, hey, you guys watched that baseball game last night? And you're like, I really hate baseball. Yeah, totally. And you have to respond right away. Even if you're in the middle of something, you can get easily distracted, you can get easily thrown off. So then there's asynchronous. So asynchronous is maybe chat-based, right? I type something in, I'm like, hey, Vinny, I really could use some help with this, but I have no expectation that Vinny's gonna respond immediately, right? So this is an axis of time. And I like this axis a lot. I think this is a cool axis for remote work. And the reality is everybody's kind of in a different position on this graph, every company, right? For instance.
So, before I mentioned my case, one thing that I thought it was a fun fact about those axes is really that we're talking about like the physical space where you're doing your work and the time component where your work's happening. So it's kind of a very, engineering geeky kind of thing. So, let me grab the mouse here. So, the company I'm currently working for, I'm in this quadrant in which I am remote every day, and we have synchronous kind of work. So we work the same hours. So everyone on the team at 8 a.m. we do our stand-up, we chat about the things we're going to do throughout the day, and then everyone will be working until 4 p.m. And so what is nice about this one is that you know that everyone in the company will be working at the same time. So if there is a new client demand that comes in and you need to reassess things and you need to kind of go into a new direction, you can huddle with your team and make decisions and then go off and implement it. Or say if there's a production bug or you're having a hard time solving a problem, you know that you can always reach out to your team members because they'll be online and you can get their support. One thing is that one caveat here is that I'm 99% of the time remote, but every now and then I'll go to the office in New York to work with my team there. So I'm kind of in between remote every day and very rarely going to the office. So moving a bit on that quadrant.
Exactly. And I'm not quite as far as you can go in any of those positions, but I am very far. I've never been down to San Francisco to see one of the companies that I work with, and I've worked with for years. Never even met the CEO in person. And I have a pretty asynchronous workload, right? It's a little bit more task-based, a little bit more, as opposed to work these specific hours. There's a few times where you need to sync up, and it is good to have these synchronous conversations over, Google Hangouts or Skype, but who likes Skype, right? And that provides a lot of value, as we've said. There's pros and cons to each. So, just a quick overview. I know you guys love overviews, and we definitely haven't given you enough yet, so we'll just kind of keep hammering you with them. Companies that you could work for are like, they fall into these different buckets, and they have different issues. Single site, single location, small company, you're at your office. Then, as those companies grow, but they're still non-remote companies, they're gonna have like maybe one office here, one office in Edmonton, or here in Vancouver, or here in Bangladesh, or wherever. And there's a little bit of time problems you have to deal with, but they're separate, right? They're modular problems, so to speak. And here is kind of like Vinny's company. Vinny's company mostly has non-remote employees, and a few teams and a few people on different teams are fully remote. So that's this. So, and then there's as remote as you get, fully distributed, like mine. That company down in San Francisco, it has a data center down there, but it doesn't have an actual physical office where people go and collate. They probably just have a PO box where stuff gets sent.
Yeah, one interesting thing to point out about as you start having more remote work inside an organization is that as you start having more employees that are remote, you start having more problems, especially communication problems, and the behavior is quite interesting. It's kind of depicted in this chart, where here in the horizontal axis we have the percentage of employees that are working remotely, on the vertical you have the number of problems you start having as you add more remote people. And so as you can see, the number of problems starts growing until it reaches threshold, and then bam, remote work is going to be very nice, going to be very smooth. And so it's quite an intriguing kind of behavior of this, the degree of remoteness here. And I think the main problem here is around communication, because we are, and that's like my theory, I think it's part of our human nature that we like to chat. So if you're in the same office as someone, you're going to reach out, you're going to chat, you're going to make decisions orally. And as you start having people that are working remotely, then people that are in the office need to be mindful of Jonah's remote, so I need to tell him that we decided to go in this direction of the project. We're going to do the modular approach and not the monolithic one. So you actually have kind of this friction around communication. And so as you start adding more people, those numbers, they'll keep on increasing until there is like this magical threshold, which is you have enough people that are working remotely that they have a strong incentive to start using tools that are meant for it. So they'll start using a lot of text-based communication. They'll start using shared documents that they can collaborate on. They'll use Hangout to communicate. They'll jump in video chats. They'll use Slack for texting. So once you have enough people that are working remote, you'll start having this culture. And it's pretty interesting because there is this concept of remote work first that I really like, which is the company, it's part of the company's culture to be remote. So everyone's having that mindset. So everyone's always thinking, even though they're in the office, they're always thinking about remote, because they might be one day working from home, they might be one day working in the office. And so this is, I think it's important to point out here that if you're going to work for a company that's doing remote work, you want to be in one of those sides. You want to be or either a very kind of remote focused company or like not remote at all, because it might be a very frustrating experience if you're kind of one of those few guys that are working remote.
So,
okay, some downsides of remote work. I think that's probably the first thing that will pop in your head, is that you feel isolated. So indeed, there's this barrier between you, work, and your colleagues. There will be a lack of spontaneous conversation, like you won't be able to turn around and start gossiping or chatting with people around you. I think this one's important for you guys that are going to start your careers. You'll have reduced mentorship bandwidth. What do I mean by that? Is that you won't have the opportunity to turn around and ask people, oh, I'm having this problem. What's your opinion on this?
That happened to me, so I can speak to that.
And not only that, but sometimes like you look at people, say, look at John, he's like pulling his hair, he's having problems, and people will naturally come in, hey John, like what's going on? What's like bugging you? So have those spontaneous way of getting unblocked, whereas if you're remote, there is no one looking at you, you have no one to engage with. So some of the things I recommend here is really being mindful about that and being intentional about communication. So if you want to get to know your coworkers, schedule recurring meetings with them. Like every week, spend half an hour chatting with them, getting to know them. Other approaches like pair programming. I've seen companies, they will have a fixed pair programming schedule in which they'll say every Monday afternoon we'll pair program, so you get to know the person and you get to know kind of some part of the code base or the project that you didn't know about. Other downsides, you might become less active. I think, yeah, Jono and I were kind of going that direction. So, for example, my commute to work is basically I get up from my bedroom, go into the kitchen, have breakfast, and then go into my office, and that's it. I'm ready to start work. So it's different from having to chase the bus or having to walk to the C train. And you guys, I don't know if you guys heard of that yet, but there's this new, I don't know, saying that sitting is the new smoking, and that scientists have shown that sitting for the entire day is almost as unhealthy as smoking. So that's something that might affect you. So, what to do here? Well, try to stay active, go out for walks, work on a treadmill. That's actually pretty interesting. This is Linus Torvalds, the creator of Linus. So
It's actually what he does.
yes, there was an interview I think on Lifehacker about his workspace and what he actually has. He has a treadmill under his workstation. So he basically sets the treadmill, I think he says he has actually a precise speed of the treadmill, which I think 1 mile per hour, so that he kind of slowly pacing and doing work. So that's a very interesting alternative. And another one which I know Canadians will probably disagree with me is shoveling snow. So I really like shoveling snow because since I'm working from home, I don't get out of the house, and when it snows, an opportunity to go outside, get some fresh air, do some exercise. So yeah, stay active.
And before we move on, let's take this opportunity to just stand up, because it seems highly appropriate. And give it a quick stretch. Maybe high five someone around you and just sit back there. There, high five the front row. Okay, now no more fun. Sit down.
Another downside, you must be mindful about your schedule. And so a lot of times when you're working in the office, like when it's lunchtime, someone will be hungry enough, they'll just get up and be like, hey guys, let's go out and have lunch. And when you're say at home by yourself, there's no one that's going to do that for you. So if you're focused, you need to be mindful to go out and eat. And another problem is overworking, because if you're not going to the office, you don't have anywhere else to go to after work because you're already home. So it's very easy and tempting because you're like trying to get that feature off and trying to solve that bug, and you keep working until like 6 p.m., 8 p.m., 10 p.m. So you really need to be mindful about your schedule. And it's not something that's like the company's asking you to do that. It's just that kind of engineering spirit that you want to get things solved and you don't have anywhere else to go to. So yeah, be mindful about your schedule.
So, but there is good, you know. Now that we've kind of told you about all the crappy parts, or some of the crappy parts of remote work, probably all of them. You know, you get to work with people you want to work with as well. That's an option for you, right? When I graduated and I started doing work or started working on my master's, I would work from home a lot of the time. And I would have other friends that were students, as you guys will, who need to study. And you know what students usually need to do effective studying? Someone else who's actually getting work done. So they would, some good friends would come over and they would study while I was doing work. And every time they got unmotivated, they would just look up and see me working away on my computer and be like, oh. And the great part about that is we can take breaks. You can do Pomodoros, which are these 25-minute timers with 5 minutes off. And you can plan those to be socialization breaks. It's excellent, it's wonderful. You don't have to feel guilty about it. You don't have to feel guilty for going for a walk every 25 minutes, which can definitely happen in workspaces, especially if you're not super comfortable and being like, I don't care what people think about me, which is very few of us. Maybe a little bit of me, but not many other people. And what's more important sometimes is nobody. We don't have that, again, we don't have to talk about baseball. We don't have to get interrupted when we're in the middle of a flow state if we choose to have nobody around us, right? Those are some huge benefits in my opinion. But they're up to you, right? Nobody's gonna make sure you're working with people you care about or spending time with people you care about. It's not gonna happen. So you've gotta be intentional about that. This is me at one of the co-working spaces that I'm part of. I'm the inverse of Vinny. I love that I do not have to shovel snow and do not have to get the vehicle out of a giant snowbank that the plows pushed over the car. So, and also commuting, you want to live on the outskirts, you want to live on a farm as long as it's got good internet, that's great. You don't have to drive all the way into downtown in rush hour to do that. That is valuable. It's valuable not to spend 2 hours in the car every day. Flexibility, I think one of the things, this is obvious, but most of you guys aren't #adulting yet. So flexibility for some of these things aren't that big of a deal. But being able to run errands, like go to Costco when it's not Saturday morning and you want to shoot yourself, is kind of nice, right? Or waiting for a delivery or the plumber, you can do even if you're on a non-asynchronous job like Vinny, because you're at home. You can just make sure you're at home, UPS dials up or rings your doorbell and you're there. It's great. So it's got some incredible flexibility for what you actually need to get done and making it so you don't have to do it in the most suboptimal way possible. Working from anywhere, this is massive, right? Sorry, rolly ball. Time zones can be one of the only things to kind of watch out for here. Like Vinny, he has to wake up 2 hours early to work on New York time. So it does matter what your time zones are, and even me, if I was on the other side of the world, I would still be getting up in the middle of the night, right? For at least one meeting every once in a while or something like that. So time zones are a real issue, but you can work around them, and you do have, and you know what? It gives you the choice to work around them. I think that's maybe the most important part. So this is something I want to talk to you guys about just really, really quickly. It's kind of a finer point, but companies don't make money from how many hours your ass is in a seat, unless you're a consultancy and they bill you by the hour no matter what kind of work you're doing. And I think this is a real value of somewhat asynchronous remote work, is you have the opportunity to be better at your job at the times that you're good at it. So if I'm gonna produce an app, and I know that I'm gonna get way better work done if I go for a walk for an hour in the morning, I'm gonna think about it, I'm going to come back, I'm gonna plan out my work, and then I'm going to actually get work done, and I'm gonna power through. I'm gonna do 1 hour of super good work, take another 5-minute walk, come back, do another hour of super good work. Those 2 hours, it's very possible that especially if you're effective, you work on your skills, is gonna be more productive than some people are in 8 hours, right? Because we just sit there, we scroll Facebook, and there's no incentive to be focused a lot of the time, right? So I think this can be a value, is that they measure you on what you actually do, not how many hours you're there. So, programmers, this is especially true. How do you succeed? Know thyself. And what does that mean? Some of us are a little bit manic, right? Maybe we don't do super good on a fixed schedule all the time. We work good in bursts. We're like, you know what? I'm feeling it right now. I'm just gonna go. I'm gonna work for 20 hours. Again, this is literally a little bit manic, But you know, work for 20 hours straight. I'm gonna get like a week's worth of stuff like done all at the same time because I'm just in it. I'm working. I know exactly what I'm doing. There's no like, you know, catching up time, context switching time. That's great. And also, conversely, you have the option to be more disciplined, like Vinny. Vinny's excellent and gets up, makes sure he gets enough sleep, works through the day, gets a ton of shit done, and then he's off, and he doesn't think about work anymore, right? Both of those are perfectly acceptable, but you gotta know what's good for you, and don't try and fit yourself into someone else's box. How many of you guys have heard of a rubber duck, of the rubber duck method? Okay, I'm proud. Maybe, I can't remember what it's from. Is it from like Pragmatic Programmer or something like that? I don't know.
Oh,
So,
I'm curious how many have used the rubber duck?
okay.
Yeah, I have it too.
Me too. So, you can buy a rubber duck, and I'll explain what that is. It's a method where, because even if you have people around you, you have this rubber duck on the side of your computer where you have to explain your decisions. Because you might not want to go bother, you know, somebody who's actually getting work done just to hash things out, just to verbalize them, because we often don't make something concrete until we verbalize it. So you can buy a rubber duck and then talk to it, or a stuffed tiger in my case. I'm going to give you a demonstration. Stanley. Stanley, I really think that you know, we should make our architecture microservices architecture. No, that is the only way. Okay, maybe it's not the only way. No, okay, that's a good point. Yeah, you know what? Maybe like a decoupled monolith would be just great right now. Okay, fine, I'll give that a shot. And it's this way of kind of verbalizing and walking through something in a crazy fashion, where you can actually make some progress and actually hash out a decision without someone taking up someone else's time. Co-working spaces, like I said, they rock for this. You have to be careful though, because they're like big open spaces and they're not always great for getting focused work done, but they're very good creative spaces and they're very good for socialization. And just like, you know, if you need to kind of speak to people and be around people who are getting good work done, like when you're stuck, they're amazing. So definitely do co-working spaces wherever you are in the world, you know, if you decide to do remote work.
Yeah, a couple of things that for me have helped me succeed in remote work is being part of communities outside work, attending gatherings and meetups and connecting with people in the physical world. And so here are some examples of like meetups and communities that I like to participate. There is like the Functional Programmers meetup here in Calgary. There's Startup Calgary meetup, and there is I'm very excited about outdoors. So there is this River Surfing Association. So it's an opportunity to connect with people that are also outside of like the world of software, people that are into outdoors. So it's nice to connect with other people because when you're remote working, a lot of times you feel isolated, as you mentioned. And another habit to succeed is to educate people around you about remote work. And does everyone know what this is about? So for those who don't, a couple of words, this was like a BBC interview that was live on TV, and they were talking about something very serious. I think it was a conflict happening in North Korea, and so you have this guy being interviewed, and he's very serious, explaining his point of view, and all of a sudden, his kids storm in. The little girl comes in, dancing,
The baby was like, going like
So yeah, it's very important to educate people around you. If you have partner, kids, pets, roommates, they need to know that you're actually working there. And this was funny because a couple of months ago I was working in Brazil and I was staying with my family, and so I was able to find a room to get work done, but my sister would come in dancing a couple of times in the middle of my work. And so that was really, luckily it wasn't during any meetings like this guy, but I had to sit down with them and explain to them that really while I was there, like they should picture me with my coworkers around me, which in a sense that's what I have in my synchronous environment. I have my coworkers working with me at the same time, so they probably wouldn't do that. My sister wouldn't be dancing around if it wasn't the office. Another thing around kind of educating people is to have a designated space, like have a place that is your office, so that people will know that when you're in there, you're doing work. You're like, you shouldn't be disturbed. Or even if you don't have a room, kind of paint a square around you and tell people, when I'm in here, I'm working. When I'm out of here, you can talk to me, and I'm available. Oh, just another fun fact here is that I haven't been able to educate my wife very well, because a lot of times she'll come in and start asking me questions, but I resort to kind of one of the remote tools we have. I just ask her to text me or send me a message so I can look at it later. So in terms of workspace, because I think that's still related to habits and kind of how we want to organize your workspace. One thing to point out is that your employer may or may not pay for your workspace. That really depends on the company. One thing that's important, it will usually be your responsibility to arrange your workspace. So if you don't do that, you'll have very bad ergonomics. You'll be in a lot of pain. You'll have a lot of discomfort when you're working. But on the upside, if there is that chair that you always fancied or that piece of equipment that you always dreamed of having, it's your opportunity to have it and use it in your work. As for meetings, so I'm in meetings a lot, so very important, silent surrounding, reliable broadband. I know that some people, they actually have two internet providers, so that if one goes down, they quickly switch to the other one and they can keep going on their meetings. I think this is very important. If you're going to have client meetings and important meetings, the strategy that Jonah and we have is that we have a very good data package on our cell phone. So if our internet goes down, we just pull our cell phones, hop back into the meeting and keep going. So, an example of a workspace. This is the setup that I have at home. So you can see there's a chair, there's a table, and one thing I like about it is the kind of thing that I fancy that I was able to get is that I have a sit-stand desk. So this is a very neat table that has electric motor, so I can just press the button, zzz, zzz, goes up and down, and I can just stand in the middle of a meeting and move around just like you guys did, stretch a bit, move around. So I really like that. The other things you will notice, as I was talking about the ergonomics, I have a footrest, I have an ergonomic chair, I have a monitor with a riser, so that all of those things I'm really comfortable as I'm working, and I feel I can really focus on my work because I'm comfortable. My eyes are aligned to the screen, my arms are in a comfortable position, and that's something that you can actually look on Google. If you search ergonomics, they'll teach you how to set up your office. The other important thing is having good hardware. So I have a high definition camera with microphone. But I think if you're gonna be remote, like people will be seeing you through the technology you're using. So if you have a bad webcam, they're just gonna see this blur of pixel moving and some sound or cranky sound coming in. So you should really invest in software, in hardware, so that you can make use of the technology and people will really be able to engage with you. So I definitely recommend that. So yeah, this is for our home setup where you can see I can get a lot of things. I can have big tables.
So there's also a nomad setup, right? I like going to coffee shops. I like going to co-working spaces. Can anyone understand what this is? Okay, well, let me show you. It folds out into like a nice little setup that I can bring around with me. I can be a little bit more ergonomic no matter what table I'm on. And I don't have to look down, because honestly I'm pretty tall, so every single table is not my height. So, are you guys scared off? Okay, that's good. Some of you are, that's okay. But the rest of you, hopefully you're like, oh my gosh, I want to do this so bad. Well, how do you do it? How many of you guys actually remember this title of the talk? It's Hitchhiker's Guide to Remote Work. So this is the answer. there's some theories that apparently it's the ASCII for star, which I guess it is, and so maybe that's why it's the meaning of life. Anyways, don't worry about it, guys. It's from the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. So if you're going to try and get remote work, one thing I would say is like you're students, right? You need to, if you don't, it's okay to not have your first job remote. In fact, it might be better because of the mentorship thing, right? You need some direction. You need to understand how businesses work, I would say. And that being said, it also can be a little bit more challenging to find it, right? You need to have something definitive about you to kind of get that. Although, as Vinny said, one of his first jobs, like, it was right after he kind of found out about, like, when he started working in software, he shortly thereafter kind of started working remote work. And he'll explain how he did that. And for me, it was just connections. I knew people, and they came to me and were like, oh, you know, we have this opening, would you apply for it? So, building an online presence really helps for that, right? Everyone here should have Twitter. Now, Vinny actually doesn't really have Twitter, so it's kind of funny that I'm saying that. But it is where most of the technical discussions happen, right? When you're learning about something, like, I can give you multiple examples of people on the web who are just really passionate about one technology. They really wanted to learn it. Most of them weren't even CS grads. They were tinkerers, right? They were like, oh man, I love Docker. What can I do with Docker? So this guy, Nathan LeClaire, he would always just post up these interesting things. He's like, oh, I did this setup. Oh, you can do this. Oh, I ran into this kind of issue when I was trying to do this thing. And he posted a blog post up about it. He was not an expert. He was fresh out of kind of like a code school down in the States, right? He was just interested. And he wasn't afraid to post. He wasn't afraid of the interweb shutting him down. You can always, kill the comment section on your blog too if you really want. But he did that, and then, I think after about six or 8 months of this, Docker, the company, reached out and were like, hey, would you like to apply for a job here? And so he didn't even think that was a possibility. He did, and he now works for them. I believe he still works for them at least. You can do things like that.
So as some of my experience on how to find remote work was to develop a skill in a niche market. And yeah, those are some languages that I'm very passionate about. As you remember, I kind of joined the functional programmers meetup. So if you have a skill that is in a niche market, like knowing some programming languages that are not mainstream, like Clojure, Haskell, or OCaml, a lot of companies that are using those kind of language, they'll have a hard time finding people with those skill sets, like in this exact place, in like the physical place of their office. So they'll be more open to hiring people in remote positions.
And your company uses which technology then?
And the company that I mentioned to you that's in New York, we are using OCaml as our primary language. So that's really fun. So another important thing, networking, and here's my visual pun for networking. I don't mean this kind of networking, but really getting to know people, know what they are working on, what's the kind of business that they've been working on, because you never know when the company will be willing to kind of open a remote position or they need your skill set. Another thing that I found useful was to stay in touch with companies that do remote work, because sometimes they might not be hiring at the moment, or you might not have the right skill set or the right experience, but if you stay in touch with them, you'll know when they'll have remote positions, and if you already talk to people there, they'll already know you, they'll already know your work, so you will increase your chances of getting a remote job.
Don't panic, guys. So, here are some resources. Why don't you just take out your phones, take a quick picture of them. And then we'll move on to questions. And so just as an FYI, Nomad List is really cool. It actually rates countries and cities for all of the different aspects of how good they are for remote workers, like healthcare for people who aren't residents, in broadband, cost of living, everything. It's really neat. Finding remote work, remote worker Slack channel. So this is Buffer does a lot of remote workers. Eric Reeves is like their director of engineering, who's the lean startup guy. I'll get you in a second. And just some really neat books that you can read from the Basecamp guys or the Zapier CEO. So, okay, Ray, why don't you be first? Sorry.
No problem. Thank you for the talk. This is one of the talks I was really looking forward to,
Okay.
especially because it's been something that's been on my mind for a while now.
Cool.
My main question is, I tend to be, I don't know about everyone else, but I tend to be like a sponge in my workplace where I really suck up all the personalities in the environment around me. And it's gotten to the point where I cannot separate mentally my workspace from my chill space. So if I try to study in my room or work in my room for a final exam, for example, I can't. I have to leave. And I was wondering what your experience or what your take or advice on that would be.
I have an idea, but if you have it, then go for it. Okay. I think, so remote doesn't mean from home necessarily, right? So again, go to coffee shops, get out of your house. I totally understand that. Some people actually have to, because we're creatures of habit, right? Like you could totally Maslow the hell out of us, right? And what I mean by that is, conditioned responses essentially. And what you can do is you can train yourself that like when you put on pants in the morning, it's work time, even though you're at home. And so as much as I would say there's options if that's absolutely true, I would question whether it's completely true. I think there are things you could do to just build a habit of like, okay, I'm just gonna go out, I'm gonna plug in my screen. Maybe when I have a second monitor, I know that it's like work time, I put on my pants, I get a coffee, and you start training yourself that when you do these three things together, you focus for 25 minutes, like with the Pomodoro. That's your goal for a week, right? It's just do one Pomodoro focused work after doing these three actions. What you can do is over time actually develop a mental habit where your brain does that. Otherwise, there's still options. Co-working spaces are great, right? They're pretty inexpensive. Coffee shops are awesome because I love coffee and pastries. Really, you can't go wrong if you love those two things at coffee shops. So yeah, no great answer for that, but those are two maybe things you could do. Good, is that okay, or do I add to it?
Just add a quick thing that some people I talk to, they say that they actually think that remote work wouldn't be for them because they find that there's too many distractions at home. There will be like food, TV, they'll have pets. So it's kind of what we were saying, you gotta kind of know yourself, and you also know that there are those things out there. So you've got to be mindful about them and develop strategies like something John was saying.
Okay. Okay. Put up two hands if it's a long question, one hand if it's a short question. Okay, long question. This is good. Okay, just give me, yeah, go for it.
Well, actually, I wrote down some questions. There's 3 of them.
Okay. But if you had to prioritize them, what would the top one be?
So this one time I was working from university, and my CTO told me not to make a database connection using the university Wi-Fi because there's some internet network security problems with that. He doesn't trust it. How do you resolve that?
Use VPNs. Don't work on open connections, and even then you still have issues. But I think VPNs are typically good enough. But I don't know. That's a pretty crappy answer. But I'm pretty sure don't not use VPNs. Like always use a VPN when you're out of your house. And even when you're in your house, just use a VPN. Because especially in the day of IoT, we don't know what of our smart speakers have been hacked, right? But I'm totally serious here. It's don't not use a VPN with anything valuable. Anyways, sorry. Okay, so.
How do you get your boss to notice you and recognize you for your work? Because it can be sometimes hard to notice what people working remotely are doing and what
Sure.
impact they're making. How do you do that?
But I would argue it's identical at an office, right? How do you do that at an office? Well, hopefully you set performance metrics. You make sure that they know what you want out of your job and you know what they want out of your job, right? So essentially, just saying, okay, what are the goals that you have for me in this coming year? What happens if I achieve it? Have these difficult conversations where you're actually asking, okay, what do I get out of it? And Vinny will have better answers for this, actually.
Yeah, I think what I'll add is really kind of, you must be chatting with your boss or whoever, the person you're working with, and kind of have clarity what are the things that you need to deliver, and kind of have a conversation around when things will get done. And so you're either delivering those things or you're not. So that's one way of really showing, presenting your work and being able to point to it. Okay, we agreed on doing those things, here they are. Does that answer your question?
So talk a lot.
It's not talking, but really communicating the things that are being done. So
Okay.
you're on the same page on what you're doing and what the company is expecting you to do, and make sure those things are aligned.
Totally. Okay. Sorry, I've already asked a few questions from up front, so I'll ask way in the back.
Okay, question. So the company I'm working right now for, when I brought up the conversation of doing work remotely, their argument was we can't really ensure the health and safety of the workers while they're at home. So it's kind of like a legal aspect. How does the company, or how do the companies that you guys work for ensure that you guys are safe in the workplace that you are working at? Do they come and like
They get around it in our case because we're both contractors. Even though we are essentially like, or have, like I have worked full time at this company essentially, but I'm still like a contractor. And Vinny
Yeah,
is
I also work as a contractor, so it's like on us to figure those things.
So, but that being said, so legality is one of the biggest issues with remote work. Everything else is pretty good as far as it's lower costing for a company outside of legal to hire a remote worker or have people work remote, right? But the answer is it utterly depends. I have no idea what is in Alberta, and it's going to be different in Alberta and BC, and it's going to be different in Canada and the States, and it's like literally different everywhere as far as what their regulations are. But if you just work for a startup, they don't have compliance on their minds.
Yeah, what I'll add is that you should probably do some research around, like John was saying, like it's very specific to kind of the place you're working on. But I imagine there are insurance companies that will cover those kind of things, or maybe there's even something that you personally could have to kind of offset the risk, and you can take ownership of that. So probably need to do some research.
Okay, we've asked from here. Okay.
So you mentioned building an online presence, and I know you said like get Twitter and have those conversations. Is there anything else that we can do to kind of make ourselves stand out? Like, do we need a personal website? Do we need to have like a great LinkedIn? How do I make myself better than others?
Okay.
Yeah.
So here's the thing: is like I think it's an important thing to know in tech. You don't have to be better than others. You have to be as good as they want. Because there's almost an unlimited amount of jobs, right? It's not like we're all fighting for like 2 jobs. It's like the companies don't want false negatives, right? They don't want, false positives. They don't want people who are not good. They're willing to hire, almost every company is willing to hire a near unlimited amount, or at least like more than they do hire of people. So you don't have to worry about that, but you do have to worry about like, a website's fine. I never had a website, but that can be okay. And honestly, I think Twitter is better. But for your first job, it's hard because the first thing that people need to see is this person is not going to be a total flop, right? And no one else is taking a risk. If no one's taking a risk on you and you don't have job experience, they're like, oh, well, at the very least, they stayed at a job for a year, or 6, or even an internship for 4 months, right? Then I think it's good to have a GitHub. It's like, even if you're just doing tutorials, like it's not even your own work in a sense. It's like, but at least hey, you've worked through the Ruby on Rails, Michael Pardo book, and at least you've done these tutorials with some Node.js or whatever, right? At least you're doing these things, and you're better than it's like this is something. And then a website is good if you've done some design. Again, with software developers, personal websites can be hard because they really showcase design most of the time. Unless you can really phrase it in like, here was a technical challenge, here's how I solved it. If you can do that, which very few undergrads can do, have a website and like really focus on that because it's experience. But yeah, GitHub, Twitter, be active, like at people, ask them questions. Write a few posts on Medium when you're learning something. If you can communicate, you're gold. Which is a funny thing about our field, right? Like some of the most competent people I know, it doesn't really matter because they can't express that to somebody, right? So, yeah. And I hope that answers your question,
Yeah.
more or less. Sorry.
I'll just point out a couple of things that kind of the habits we cover doesn't mean you kind of do all of them, take them, and like you'll be good to go. And actually, it's interesting that John and I, we're just 2 data points, but our story is quite different because, as you said, I don't have a Twitter account. I never had like personal website. I do have a GitHub. I think that's useful to showcase a little bit of the things we've done. But I never had any online presence. Mine was more kind of developing skill in the niche market and getting in touch with companies. So there
it's not about quantity, it's about quality, right? I didn't really express that, but that's the truth. Don't write pages of stuff. Be clear, be concise. Same with your GitHub. Maybe write or read why it's useful, right? Like what you learned from doing the Ruby on Rails tutorial. Like, oh great, like I understand MVC architectures now. Oh, I understand ORMs and the usefulness of being able to translate database rows into Ruby objects or whatever it is. Or Django, or all of these have their own kind of strengths. Or like, yeah, breaking it up into a project is a little bit better of a modular approach, which is what Django does versus Rails. Blah, 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 blah. Just, I don't know. And unfortunately that's for technical people, and then sometimes you have to deal with HR, and HR really does just look at your website and their pretty pictures, and yeah. Okay, one from over here, and then I don't know if we'll be out of time or not.
Oh.
We're out of time. One more, okay, okay. You guys fight to the death, and whoever wins. I'm just kidding. Okay.
Sure. So I just have a question. So I've worked with someone who's working remotely, and I find it challenging to communicate. And we'll use Slack, we'll use any of the chat methods, but for meetings it gets really difficult to like either dial them in or like there's a whole bunch of different methods obviously to get them. What's your guys' preferred tool to get collaboration going? Have you guys used collaborative code editors before? Have you guys gone, like how far do you go with the tooling? Or do you guys just stick with Slack?
I'll answer after, but
So it seems that what you're telling us that you guys are having more kind of technology problem, like what's the right tool to use here, is that correct? Yeah, what I would suggest is try out a couple of different tools. Like for dialing in, let's see from my experience, I know that Google Hangouts, for example, when you create a meeting, it will have a number that you can dial in, but I would always suggest just go like on Hangouts and like the online thing, don't dial in. And what we've used that's really helpful is just like screen sharing. So just like hop on the same channel. John and I actually prepared part of the presentation kind of remotely. We're like screen sharing and chatting about it. Oh, should we remove this? Should we remove those lines? So that's kind of a specific answer, but what I would say is that the tools are out there. So if those tools are not working, it might be worth spending some time trying other tools.
And I'll just add, there is one specific screen sharing tool which has been getting essentially most of the mind share in remote work, and that's Zoom. So Zoom is kind of like, it was made, if you guys ever use like Cisco Quick Conference or whatever, like all the enterprisey stuff uses it. It's frustrating as hell. The like director of engineering for that moved on to his own company and was like, we can't make this good enough. So we need to start from scratch, so we just did a startup called Zoom. And it's very effective. It records all sessions automatically and then sends it to all participants. So like, if you're having a conference and you forget what was said, which is so typical. You're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. And you're like, I remember there was that big thing and I was sure I would remember it, but I don't remember it. Anyway, so it does that. It's reliable. It's like easy to use. So that's the big one for Zoom. Honestly, like with Brooklyn, every time kind of we're going through something, he's got an issue with some code, we want to talk about design decisions, we pair over Hangouts. We just, he opens up screen share. I don't even touch the keyboard. It's like, I'm just talking with him and directing, and asking questions, hopefully, if I'm a good employer.
Another tool I remember we tried in the past, Screen Hero, which you can screen share and both people can control them out, so that's actually also interesting.
And I think there's an attachment for Visual Studio Code now that will do it. I haven't used it, but. So I don't know, like it's not a great answer, but it's a few things. As far as communication goes though, like some people you just have to hire for, if you're ever gonna be in a position where you hire someone for remote work, do a trial. Don't, because communication is honestly one of the biggest things. If they're not a good communicator, they're not gonna be a good fit for remote work. Because that's the only way of expressing something essentially. And so like, work on your own communication skills. That's a shout out to computer scientists, But, okay, anyways, and then please just quickly take a picture here if you have feedback to give and just send it my way. Or tweet me on Twitter. Either one will be fine. But we would love to get feedback if it's more than just like, yeah, it's pretty decent, that's not that helpful. But if you're like, oh, it would have been better if maybe we did it faster, or if we added more detail, or whatever, let me know.
Yeah, all feedback is welcome.
This is our first conference talk, so anyway.
All right.